What's up and welcome to the channel, Roadside History. The goal of my channel is just to give you a brief history of some of the areas that we drive by every day. And since this is the first episode and you're watching the first video for the first time in the history of my channel, I just wanted to give you a brief overview to tell you what the channel's about. You see, every day as we drive along in our cars, whether we're going to and from work, maybe we're on a road trip, maybe we're going to a friend's house in a nearby city, we pass historical markers and areas that have great historical reference, and we know little about them. So my goal is to bring you a short video every week, I don't know, 7 to 10 minutes of a historical area and give you a really brief history about it, enough to maybe pique your curiosity and let you set out and discover more about that area on your own. So thanks for joining us on Roadside History. If you haven't already liked and subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and do so. Every subscriber makes it possible for me to show more videos and tell you more brief history about some of the great areas across our country that we drive past every day. Today I'm traveling to a really unique ghost town. In fact, it's one of the most famous ghost towns in the American West. This ghost town's been photographed multiple times. It's been the backdrop for many, many movies, including the great movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's a ghost town located about 10 minutes outside of the entrance to Zion National Park. The name of the place we're going? Grafton. The history is significant. There's murder, there's war, there's building up and homesteading. There's so many amazing historical stories that come from this little town. So follow me along today as we go into Grafton and we learn more about the history of the community. We also learn about some of the conflicts and challenges that the people faced. And then I'm going to take you inside some of the buildings that still exist today inside this incredible ghost town. Thanks for following me on Roadside History. Welcome to Grafton, Utah. This is the ghost town that's become one of the most iconic ghost towns in the American West. Behind me, you see the Grafton Schoolhouse. This was a schoolhouse that was built in 1886 by its local residents. But let me give you a little bit of history about the area. About 8 miles to the west of where I'm standing today is a small town called Virgin. And in 1859, the Tenney family, along with 4 or 5 other families, decided to make an establishment along the Virgin River about a mile to the west of where I'm standing today. 3 years later, those families would be washed out by a terrible flood and they would establish the community of Grafton on these very grounds that I stand today. You see, Grafton was established to be a cotton growing area. Brigham Young, the leader of the Mormon Church, feared that with the Civil War, cotton production would come to a halt, and needing to have a self-sustaining society, he felt it would be important for his people to grow cotton in the area, and so they did. In 1862, when they moved here and they began building up and building their crops, they found that they planted so much cotton that they didn't plant enough crops to sustain themselves, and so they had to alter some of the things they did. Eventually this community, and I'm going to give you a little visual, you can see the schoolhouse, you can see Zion National Park skyline there, the mountainsides behind it, and then you can see one of the homes here. But eventually what the people would discover is that they needed to change some things. And as they did, as they began farming more, the community began to grow. In fact, by 1866, roughly 168 people inhabited this area, which is quite big for a small establishment in southern Utah at the time. This building that you're looking at, the schoolhouse, this schoolhouse would be built from clay bricks that will be harvested from the areas right around here near Grafton. And in fact, the lumber that would be used to build the rafters and the bell tower and a lot of the buildings that you see came from an area known as Mount Trumbull. Mount Trumbull is located about 75 miles from here. It's actually in Arizona. It's in an area called the Arizona Strip. Anyway, a thriving community would grow here. They would struggle for years to tame the Virgin River. You see, every year as the monsoon floods would come, the community would be washed out. Their dams would break, their holding areas would break. It was constant work. So much sand in the water that it became a very hard place to live. And later, as time would go on, and a canal system would be built about 20 miles to the west of here. The residents would end up leaving Grafton and move into what would become known as the Hurricane Valley. But while they were here, they suffered triumph and tragedy. In fact, one such situation, the year of 1866, was probably one of the worst years in Grafton history. 14 residents from this community would die. In fact, if you go to the Grafton Cemetery, you'll see there's an obelisk-shaped headstone there for the Berry family. Mr. Berry and his brother and wife were killed by Native Americans on their way to a town called Orderville. In addition to that, several members of this community were killed. Some died by disease and illness, and others by accident in 1866 alone. You can imagine the effect of losing 14 members of your community in 1 year in a community the size of 100 and roughly 65 people. You can imagine how big of an impact that would have on the people that lived here. Time here was short. In fact, in the schoolhouse that would also serve as a music hall and a church, the schoolhouse would eventually close its doors in 1919 as the last students came through, as people began to migrate down to the town of Hurricane. It's pronounced hurricane, but it's spelled hurricane. But of course, water was one of the main factors that would create this. Anyway, I've shown you this schoolhouse. I'm going to take you to some of the different buildings here and show you a little bit about that. And then I'm going to take you over to the cemetery and show you the cemetery today. Again, this is one of the most iconic scenes in American movie history as well. I know of 3 movies that were filmed here, but the most popular and famous movie was the 1969 movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, starring Robert Redford. So if you've ever seen that movie, you'll see scenes here with this iconic building behind me, as well as this building over here, and subsequently other buildings that were built and then tore down after the movie. But I wanted to show you a little bit about Grafton, and again, I'll take you to some of the other homes. I'll take you over to the Wood home, which is just down the road, which became famous for its split rail fence. Anyway, if you haven't liked and subscribed to my channel, Roadside History, go ahead and do so now. We're here inside the Alonzo Russell home. The Alonzo Russell home was one of the first structures built here in the Grafton area. Walk with me as I take you in this home. Alonzo Russell had a couple of wives. This was the home of his first wife, Nancy. Across the street was the home of his second wife. But he built this home in 1861. Russell would serve as a local bishop in the area. He helped in the building of the schoolhouse. It's just adjacent to the home in which we're in right now. But I want to take you upstairs just to kind of give you a feel so you can see what it was like to live at this time. There's no running water, obviously. Even today, there's no running water. This home was restored several years ago after concerns about developing in the area were growing, and a group of people rushed to preserve the area and keep it from development and summer retreats and whatnot. This is the upstairs is divided into 2 sections, as you can see. It's an amazing home. Has an amazing front porch, which we'll show you in a moment. You see, the Russells were musicians. He was a blacksmith, he was a musician, he did a lot of different things, but music was a big draw in this community. In fact, cowboys would come from far and wide to come to social dances and music shows. The Russells were well known in the community for sitting on their front porch while Dad would play the guitar, others would sing, and the whole community actually became a music hub. What you're looking at is the Alonzo Russell home. I mentioned while I was inside there, the front porch. I want to show you what that porch looks like today. Ample space, looks like it's about an 8-foot porch. Ample space for family members to hang out in the afternoons and to play music and to just have a good time getting along with each other. I'm going to take you across the street. The next place I'm taking you to is the home of his second wife. Mr. Russell's second wife, he built a cabin for her, and as you can see, here's the cabin. Now the cabin isn't quite as nice as the home across the way. It's a 2-room cabin. I'll take you inside. You have to duck. I mean, there you can see I'm 6'1", so you can see where the roof is. But let me take you inside the cabin really quick. The roof kind of slants a little bit, but it's all been restored. Again, I mentioned earlier that these individuals that have a lot of family roots and respect for the Grafton area came through and protected this area from the growth of developers. I'm sitting here on the porch of the John and Ellen Wood home. John and his family would move here into Grafton, and John was a mason and a carpenter. He had the skills necessary to build a facility, a home like this for his family, but before they moved into something like this, they lived in a 6-foot dugout. Eventually he would build on that, and he'd build a cellar on the back side of this house. It's still there today. It's about 12 feet wide by about 12 feet in length, but this home is a gorgeous home that was beautifully restored by the Grafton Heritage Project. That's the organization that maintains this little ghost town today, the Grafton Heritage Project. In fact, you can Google them out online and make a donation to them, and that'll help preserve this area and keep it pristine. You see, John, when he lived here, he did a number of things with his family. He built this beautiful area here. Off to the distance here, you can see the split rail fence, and then behind me is a big barn, and just down the way is a raised granary. You can see that building through the tree over there. That's a raised granary that all of his family would maintain this area. In fact, Ellen would live here. She'd be 77 years old before she would die in 1898, buried just down the road in the Grafton Cemetery. Her husband John Sr. would stay here and eventually pass away in 1911, if my memory serves me correct. But it was Luane who would live here, live out most of his days, and then eventually settled down in the town of Hurricane, Utah. Luane would become instrumental in preserving this area with the Grafton Heritage Project and other areas and other buildings nearby. So anyway, we wanted to show you the John and Ellen Wood home, beautifully preserved, wonderful porch, and inside it's a 3-room house, big living room. It looks like a kitchen on the back side and then a bedroom off to the other side. So 3 rooms total, but this would have been comfortable living in the 1870s and 1880s. Today, by any stretch of the imagination, this would be a hard way of life, as I've mentioned earlier, there's no running water, there's no air conditioning. You can imagine in July and August when the temperatures exceed 110 degrees that it would have been quite warm in this house. So anyway, the John and Ellen Wood home. You know, every great ghost town has an amazing cemetery. Grafton is no different. I'm standing here in the cemetery, the Grafton City Cemetery here today. In fact, behind me is the iconic obelisk headstone to the Berry family. I mentioned earlier the Berrys were killed by Native Americans while they were on their way to Orderville, Utah. They were killed in 1866, and after that conflict, after they were murdered and their funerals took place, there was actually conflict at their funerals when Native Americans came into town and townsfolk went after them. But that ushered in a period of warfare. 1866, the residents of Grafton moved to a town called Rockville. Rockville's just a few miles from where I'm standing here today, but the members that lived here, the community members, were told by their religious leaders to consolidate and to move out of Grafton until tempers had calmed between the Native Americans and the residents living in the area. By 1868, residents of Grafton would return again and live in their community. But I wanted to show you the cemetery. I wanted to show you this famous headstone that's here. You can see it's got a fence around it. Kind of makes it stand out a little bit. Joseph Berry, died in 1866, April 2nd. Robert Berry, same day as I mentioned earlier. And then on the other side of this headstone, you will see the name of Isabel Hales. Anyway, Miss Hales was the wife, I believe, of Robert, if I'm not mistaken. But just let me show you a little bit. This is what the cemetery looks like. There is no grass here. Definitely looks like an Old West cemetery, and some of these headstones made out of wood, and other headstones, you can see that they're pretty well weathered. A lot of individuals lived in this community, and unfortunately A lot of death took place. I already mentioned 1866 being a particularly bad year, but residents wouldn't stay long. Again, they established this area in 1859 is when they began. 1862, after that flood, they moved up a little ways, and they stayed here until just after the turn of the 1900s. They would move down to Hurricane, Utah, as the Hurricane Canal would be built, and more water would be more plentiful and more arable farmland for their families. But one last time, thanks for taking a stop with us on Roadside History. And if you haven't liked and subscribed to my channel, please do so. Till next time, enjoy your next road trip.